Happy New Year and welcome to Eye on Politics. Hope your 2026 is off to a great start. Well, 2025 is now in the history books, and it was a Texas-sized year for politics in the Lone Star State, from redistricting to school choice and to the horrific and tragic flooding in central Texas that killed at least 135 people, including children, at Camp Mystic. It's not often we air panel discussions, but when we do, we like to speak with some of the best political reporters at the Texas Capitol. Brad Johnson, formerly of the Texan, and Jasper Scherer, politics editor of the Texas Tribune. And we start with the deadly flooding.
Well, first off, there's going to be a lot of litigation ongoing for years to come between particularly parents of the children who died at Camp Mystic. I'm sure there will be others too, especially for the standalone people that were in the campsite that were swept away. Yeah. On the legislative front, there were bills passed, regulations established, and now they have to put it into action. And there's going to be a lot of friction with that implementation. A lot of camps have suggested they're going to be forced to close if they don't comply with this. That comes with, for some of them, a pretty large expenditure in terms of moving cabins away from the floodplain. So a lot of stuff left to come on this, and it's going to be felt for years to come.
Jasper.
Yeah, I think Brad touched on some of the regulations that were put in place by the legislature over the summer in response. I think that'll be one of the more kind of immediate effects that we'll see, just, requiring these overnight camp operators to come up with emergency plans with, evacuations just aimed at preventing, a repeat of the horror that we saw on July 4th. Prohibiting the state from issuing licenses when these camps have cabins in certain, dangerous floodplain areas. So I think, just going forward, clearly this issue is being taken more seriously.
And the other thing that we saw is these outdoor warning sirens already start going up in Kerr County, where they never put these up. What do you make of that? I knew this was going to happen pretty quickly, because when people realized that there were no warning sirens in these areas, it was shocking.
Yeah, and clearly that was one of the first requirements put in place by the legislature for this in response to it. It's one of those situations where you never think you need it until you do. And, these localities put off these expenditures for years and years until something like the catastrophe like this happens. And then they have no choice.
So let's talk about another big story this year, which we're still really seeing the repercussions, and that is redistricting.
I think one big takeaway is just that this sort of showed how Republicans had completely solidified their grasp of the legislature and really just sort of eviscerated any chance of pushback from Democrats. I think that had already been the case for some sessions, but this session really, when you pair this with some of the other issues where Republicans just got their way, checked off a lot of boxes on big kind of white whale issues that had evaded them for years, then you go into the special session where Democrats did really pretty much everything they could have to put up roadblocks, make life difficult for Republicans, and even, you look at the initially favorable court ruling for Democrats striking down the map. Even with that, you eventually get to the Supreme Court, and the map stays in place. So I think just Democrats put out all the stops they could, and at the end of the day, there was nothing they could do. I think one other takeaway as well is that, looking at kind of the national picture here, because I think Texas sort of set off this big arms race. We're still seeing that reverberate in other states. It does seem like this is essentially turning out to be a wash in some ways. Still some maps left to be drawn or potentially not drawn. We don't know how the full national picture will look, but it's definitely looking like with Indiana not going ahead with its redistricting, that Republicans aren't seeing the national benefit from this that they maybe initially expected going into the Texas fight.
Brad.
Well, the Supreme Court ruling, in my mind, solidified what we always knew about this. This was a pure power play. This was drawn for partisan gain. The president said that explicitly, and the Supreme Court's ruling reflected that. Now, Republicans made it a lot harder on themselves than it had to be by invoking race in certain areas. The DOJ letter won't go into all the details on that, but that caused a whole host of problems for Republicans, and shooting themselves in the foot on that nearly cost them their new map. Um, so they were playing with fire quite a bit legally throughout this. But they're also playing with fire politically, because there's no guarantee they win all these seats, and it's looking like a really difficult cycle for them next year. And I don't think they win all these seats, all 5 of these.
So let's talk about school choice and school funding, another huge issue this past year. Obviously, the governor got his school choice program across the finish line because he had, really campaigned for it hard across the state, also went after the Republicans in the Texas House who opposed it. And so we saw that bear out. Now, the Texas Comptroller's Office is charged with putting this all together. What do you think the major challenges are for Acting Comptroller Kelly Hancock in getting this off the ground? Brad, we'll start with you.
What comes to mind is the same thing as Obamacare. Getting people to actually sign up, it can be difficult, and if they don't know about it, or they don't feel like it's worth going through the trouble of signing up, then they're not going to. There's a lot of logistical hurdles like that when the rubber meets the road are going to determine, the success, or however we're gauging the success of this program. Does it max out the number of kids that they have allotted with the $1 billion? And then if that happens, is that justification to then expand it down the road, or do they need to shrink it? Do they need to tinker at the margins? When actually implementing law happens, it's messy, and there's going to be problems crop up. There's going to be examples of abuse and fraud. It's just a question of how the state deals with it, and what guidelines they put in place, guardrails they put in place to prevent that after things do pop up.
And don't you think, Brad, the biggest challenge, or Jasper, the biggest challenge is going to be, does the state attract enough low-income and disabled students? Because that's what the Republican leadership really wanted to focus on, prioritize these groups of students. And if that doesn't come to pass, could that prove to be a political problem for Republicans? Because we're going to know, the rollout is going to start, this is going to start in the fall before the election.
Right.
So do you think that has some potential political traps here?
I think it could, absolutely. That you're absolutely right that was sort of a big selling point, and that was one of the big changes towards the end of the process that ended up getting this bill across the finish line. Was they made some changes to ensure that increase the likelihood that these vouchers or ESAs would go to lower income folks. So I think that's absolutely a risk or a potential pitfall if it turns out that a bunch of high income folks are disproportionately benefiting from these ESAs. But if you look ahead to the 2027 legislative session and beyond, I think the conversation from here on out is going to be really about where does this initial version of the program go from here? How do we expand it? What sorts of tweaks are made to, in terms of how the vouchers are distributed. So I think, if we, at the same time, if a bunch of these do end up going disproportionately to upper income folks, there is always going to be an opportunity to, for lawmakers to course correct, when they return to Austin, if that's the way they want to go.